IDF has confirmed Israel has hit nuclear targets.
Not so long ago, Israel and Iran were partners. During the era of the Shah from the 1950s until the late 1970s, the two nations shared a quiet but deep strategic alliance. They were both non-Arab powers in a predominantly Arab Middle East, and both were aligned with the United States during the Cold War. This shared geopolitical landscape fostered cooperation in intelligence, military matters, and even trade. Israel saw Iran as a crucial counterweight to the Arab states that surrounded it, while Iran's monarchy viewed Israel's technological and military prowess as a valuable asset. This was a pragmatic partnership, built on mutual interests and a shared suspicion of their neighbors. Everything changed in 1979. The Iranian Islamic Revolution was not just a domestic upheaval, it was an event that completely redrew the map of Middle Eastern politics. The Shah was overthrown, and in his place rose Ayatollah Khomeini, a cleric with a radically different vision for Iran and the world. This new Islamic Republic defined itself in opposition to the West, particularly the United States, which it famously dubbed the Great Satan. Israel, as America's closest ally in the region, was branded the Little Satan. The new regime's ideology was fundamentally anti-Zionist, viewing Israel as an illegitimate state and an outpost of Western imperialism on sacred Muslim land, a cancer to be removed from the region. The transformation was immediate and absolute. Diplomatic ties were severed, and what was once a quiet partnership became a bitter and existential rivalry. Iran's new leaders made hostility towards Israel a central pillar of their foreign policy, not merely as a rhetorical device but as a guiding principle for their actions across the region. For them, opposing Israel was a moral and religious duty, a way to champion the Palestinian cause and assert Iran's leadership over the Islamic world. This ideological commitment set the stage for decades of conflict, turning former friends into implacable enemies whose struggle would come to define the modern Middle East. From Tehran's perspective, this new stance was a necessary correction, a rejection of the Shah's pro-Western policies which they felt had betrayed Islamic values and the Palestinian people. The revolutionary government sought to export its ideology, and positioning itself as the primary defender against Israel was a powerful tool for gaining influence. For Israel, the change was a profound strategic shock. A large, powerful and distant ally had suddenly become a revolutionary state on its doorstep, ideologically committed to its destruction. This dramatic reversal laid the groundwork for a long and complex conflict that would grow from words and ideology into a direct and dangerous military confrontation. Following the 1979 revolution, the conflict between Israel and Iran did not immediately erupt into open warfare. Instead, it descended into the shadows, fought through intermediaries and clandestine operations. Iran, understanding it could not challenge Israel's conventional military might directly, adopted a strategy of asymmetric warfare. It began to build what it called the Axis of Resistance, a network of allied states and non-state militant groups across the Middle East. The goal was to surround Israel with hostile forces, creating a ring of fire that could bleed it slowly and challenge its regional dominance without Iran having to fire a single missile from its own soil. The most formidable of these proxies is Hezbollah in Lebanon. With Iran's funding, training and weaponry, Hezbollah transformed from a small militia into a powerful political and military force, one that effectively controls large parts of Lebanon and possesses an arsenal of rockets and missiles that can reach deep into Israeli territory. In Palestine, Iran provided support to groups like Hamas and Islamic Jihad, fueling their fight against Israel from the Gaza Strip. In Syria, Iran propped up the Assad regime, using the country's civil war as an opportunity to establish a military foothold on Israel's northern border. And in Yemen, the Houthi rebels, also backed by Iran, began threatening a vital global shipping lane in the Red Sea. Israel responded to this creeping encirclement with its own covert war. For years, its intelligence agency Mossad was suspected of carrying out a campaign of targeted assassinations against Iranian nuclear scientists, hoping to sabotage the country's atomic ambitions from within. It conducted frequent airstrikes in Syria, targeting Iranian military installations, weapons convoys destined for Hezbollah, and personnel from Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or IRGC. This was a war of sabotage, espionage, and precision strikes, a deadly game of cat and mouse played across multiple countries, always just below the threshold of a full-scale direct confrontation. This long era of proxy conflict allowed both sides to land significant blows without claiming direct responsibility, maintaining a fragile and deniable form of deterrence. Iran could strike at Israeli interests through its partners, while Israel could degrade Iran's military capabilities and nuclear progress without triggering an all-out war. However, this shadow war created a deeply unstable environment. With each assassination, each airstrike, and each rocket fired by a proxy group, the stakes grew higher. The lines became increasingly blurred, and the risk of a miscalculation that could spiral into a direct, open conflict became a constant and growing threat to the entire region. The single greatest source of tension in this conflict has been Iran's nuclear program. While Tehran has always insisted its program is for peaceful energy purposes, its actions have told a different story. The discovery of secret nuclear facilities, the enrichment of uranium to levels far beyond what is needed for civilian power, and the obstruction of international inspectors have fueled deep suspicion. For Israel, the prospect of a nuclear-armed Iran is not just a strategic problem, it is seen as an existential threat. Israeli leaders have repeatedly stated they will never allow the regime in Tehran, which openly calls for their country's destruction, to possess the ultimate weapon. The breakdown of international oversight made the situation far more dangerous. The 2015 nuclear deal, known as the JCPOA, had placed limits on Iran's program in exchange for sanctions relief, but its effective collapse left Iran free to accelerate its work. By 2024, Iran was enriching uranium to 60% purity, a short technical step away from the 90% needed for a bomb. With international inspectors expelled from key sites, the world was flying blind. This lack of visibility created a critical window of opportunity, or perhaps necessity, for Israel. The fear was that Iran could make a final secret dash for the bomb, leaving Israel with no time to react. This fear appears to have triggered a dramatic shift in Israeli strategy. In October 2024, Israel launched a series of major airstrikes codenamed Operation Days of Repentance. These were not the limited, deniable strikes of the past. This was a direct, large-scale attack on Iran's nuclear infrastructure, missile bases, and air defense systems. The message was clear: the shadow war was over. Israel was no longer willing to tolerate Iran's nuclear progress. Iran's response, Operation True Promise 2, saw it fire around 180 missiles at Israel. Though most were intercepted by Israel's advanced air defense systems, some got through, causing damage and casualties. The taboo of direct state-on-state attacks had been broken. The situation escalated into a full-blown air war in June 2025. On June 13th, Israel launched a massive preemptive attack called Operation Rising Lion, using its most advanced F-35 fighter jets, drones, and intelligence operatives.
Struck at the heart of Iran's nuclear enrichment program. We struck at the heart of Iran's nuclear weaponization.
The strikes reportedly killed senior IRGC commanders and key nuclear scientists, dealing a severe blow to Iran's military leadership and atomic program. This time, Iran's retaliation was swift and indiscriminate, launching over 100 drones and ballistic missiles, some of which struck civilian areas in Israel. The conflict had now moved decisively from the shadows into the open, a direct military confrontation between two of the region's most powerful nations. The escalation from a proxy war to direct conflict has sent shockwaves far beyond the borders of Israel and Iran. The entire Middle East is now on edge, with regional powers forced to navigate a new and dangerous landscape. Iran's so-called axis of resistance is showing signs of fracture. In Syria, President Assad, while still reliant on Tehran, is reportedly seeking to distance himself from the conflict, unwilling to turn his country into a permanent battlefield for Iran's war. Hezbollah in Lebanon, despite its powerful arsenal, faces immense domestic pressure not to drag a fragile Lebanon into a devastating war with Israel. Iran's influence, once a source of strength, is now becoming a liability for its allies. This instability has also ignited fears of a nuclear domino effect. As Iran moved closer to developing a nuclear weapon, other regional powers have grown increasingly nervous. Saudi Arabia, Iran's main rival for regional dominance, has long hinted that if Iran gets a bomb, it will seek one too. Turkey, another major power with its own ambitions, might also feel compelled to pursue a nuclear option to maintain the balance of power. The direct military clashes between Israel and Iran have only intensified these concerns, raising the terrifying prospect of a Middle East where multiple rival nations are armed with nuclear weapons, making the region exponentially more volatile. The global implications are equally severe, particularly for the world economy. The Middle East is home to some of the world's most critical energy routes, including the Strait of Hormuz and the Red Sea. a wider conflict directly threatens these vital shipping lanes, through which a significant portion of the world's oil and gas supplies must pass. Any disruption could cause oil prices to skyrocket, triggering a global energy crisis and potentially tipping fragile economies into recession. The attacks and counterattacks have already created immense volatility in the oil markets, as traders and governments brace for the worst-case scenario. International powers, including the United States, Europe, and China, are watching with grave concern, issuing calls for restraint that have so far gone unheeded. The United States, while publicly denying any direct involvement in the Israeli strikes, has reiterated its ironclad support for Israel's security and deployed its own air defense assets to the region, a clear signal of its strategic alignment. The conflict is testing old alliances and creating new geopolitical fault lines. The world holds its breath, hoping that diplomacy can pull the two nations back from the brink, but fearing that the cycle of escalation has now taken on a life of its own. The core drivers of this conflict are now clearer and more dangerous than ever. At its heart, it is a clash between two fundamentally opposed visions for the Middle East. Iran, under its revolutionary government, seeks to upend the existing order, export its ideology, and establish itself as the region's hegemon by championing the cause of resistance against Israel and the West. Israel, in turn, is determined to preserve its security and its position as a dominant military and technological power, and it views Iran's nuclear ambitions and regional network of proxies as a direct threat to its very existence. These irreconcilable goals have created a zero-sum conflict, where a gain for one side is perceived as a loss for the other. The recent escalation to direct warfare marks a profound and perilous new chapter. For decades, the deterrence of the shadow war, however fragile, held. Both sides understood the devastating consequences of a full-scale conflict. But Israel's decision to strike Iran directly in 2024 and 2025, driven by the urgency of the nuclear threat, has shattered that understanding. Iran, in turn, has abandoned its policy of so-called strategic patience, choosing to retaliate directly to restore its own deterrence and demonstrate that attacks on its soil will not go unanswered. This new doctrine of direct confrontation has locked both nations into a dangerous cycle of tit-for-tat escalation. Looking ahead, the path is fraught with peril. The immediate future will likely be defined by this new military reality. We can expect to see further strikes, both covert and overt, as each side attempts to gain a strategic advantage. Israel will likely continue its efforts to dismantle Iran's nuclear program and degrade its military capabilities, while Iran will seek opportunities to strike back, either directly or through its remaining proxies. The key question is whether this cycle can be contained, or if one side will miscalculate, leading to a full-scale regional war that could draw in other countries, including the United States. Ultimately, the future of the Israel-Iran conflict, and indeed the stability of the entire Middle East, hangs in the balance. The shift from shadowboxing to open combat has unleashed forces that will be difficult to control. The immediate dangers are a wider war, nuclear proliferation, and global economic disruption. Finding a path back from the brink will require immense diplomatic effort and a fundamental recalculation of interests in both Tehran and Jerusalem. But as of today, on the 14th of June 2025, the drums of war are beating louder than ever, and the region is closer to a catastrophic conflict than at any point in its recent history.